And we're staying in Dubbo, in fact, for the next part of the program because today's podcast is made in Dubbo. And it looks to keep you up to date with the very latest in technology developments from right across the world. Matthew Dickerson is a tech expert. Naturally, his podcast is called Tech Talk. Matt, hello.
G'day, Anna. I'm not going to the zoo and I'm not wearing a mask, but I'm in a room all by myself at the moment, so I should be okay.
Well, you still can go to the zoo because thankfully the staff had their finger on the pulse.
Exactly
How things
right.
could have been different. Incredible.
Very switched on they are out there.
Right, yes. Well, you're in a room, I'm in a room, and we get to talk tech. And
Excellent.
it's a huge umbrella technology now. I mean, how do you wrap your head around all the biggest tech developments in the world for each podcast episode?
I do spend a lot of time researching, but I love it, so it's not such a bad thing. I read endlessly. It's not a day goes by that I'm not looking at something, researching something, trying to find out what's happening next, where it's going. So it's such a big field. And the thing with technology, I also write some articles, and I wrote an article one time about a slippery toilet. And someone actually questioned me about it, and they said, how can you possibly put a toilet in the field of technology? But I see technology as really developments that are making our lives easier. It doesn't have to be electronics. I suppose the first caveman, when he picked up a rock and turned it into some sort of hammer, that was a bit of technology. So things like a slippery toilet, or one I did recently, which was a way to help people get past their fear of needles for vaccination. All those things, I count those as technology.
I have to ask, is a slippery toilet different to a normal toilet? I have to ask. I feel like I'm out of the loop.
A slippery toilet actually uses less water because it's coated with a very slippery surface, so you don't need as much water to get rid of the waste product. So it's a water-saving feature.
High five. See, you're from Dubbo. You have just had 5 years of drought. Of course, it's a slippery toilet.
Exactly.
Matt Dickerson with us this afternoon as we talk podcasts, and his podcast is Tech Talk. So how much interest is there for this kind of info that you're bringing together for your podcast around technology?
Well, believe it or not, I started on ABC, and way back in 2008, I started doing a technology segment on ABC Western Plains, and that progressed a little bit further. I ended up on the Tony Delroy show for all the years that Tony did that, and then obviously when he retired, I stopped there and went on to the Trevor Chappell show. And there's about 9 radio stations that I'm doing at the moment around the region, and a couple of those are ABC and a couple of other commercial channels. And it seemed to be getting more and more popular, and I started putting some of those on YouTube and just posting some of those audio files as well. And then people said, well, that's great. I'm getting a little bit out of that one, a little bit out of that one. Why don't you put them all together and just have one show? So essentially that's what I did. All the bits that I talk about on radio each week, I then put them together into one episode and talk about that, which goes for longer than those radio programs. Most radio programs like me to go for around about, say, 10 minutes in terms of their radio show, their format. But on a podcast, you can go longer, and it seems to be about 30 minutes, just over 30 minutes maybe seems to be the sweet spot there.
Good, because I think when it comes to detail, this is the sort of stuff you want to have the time to delve into. We're talking podcasts today on ABC Radio New South Wales. So let's dive in. Easily one of the pieces of technology that's nearest and dearest to many of us, and quite accessible, of course, is our phone.
The real issue here is this chronic sleepiness. Now, back in 2005, a similar survey was done. 35% of those high school students would say they had chronic sleepiness, or external people studying them would say they had chronic sleepiness.
Fair enough.
That's now up to 75%.
75%.
And they're blaming it on technology again, James. Leave us alone, please.
But it's just so easy. I mean, you're on an app, you're just or scrolling through. Let's use Facebook as an example. Just scrolling through. I'll just check a couple more stories, and then I'll just check a couple more. It's just so easy, and then you just lose track of time.
Doom scrolling is what that's often referred to, and people said that they get into bed, especially in winter now, we get all snuggled up under the doona, and you just reach across for your phone because you've got it charging next to the bed, of course, and you just have a quick flick, and an hour later you're watching some video about cats, and you said, how did I get here?
But yeah, they're using technology, or at least psychology, that they use in poker machines as well. I mean, your app's no good unless people want to click on it, and so it's all that poker machine sort of psychology.
James Eddy speaking there with Matt Dickerson on his podcast, which we're talking about this afternoon. Has it been incredible for you to see that thread of psychology come together with all of the other tech info that you're presenting, Matt, and how technology actually really affects us?
It's actually quite interesting. There's a whole range of topics that we delve into. And just to give you a little bit of background there, Sorana, I've got lots of different radio hosts I do different radio programs with. But of course, I couldn't pick one of those to do the podcast with because that would disenfranchise all the other radio hosts that I did, as much as I wanted to use the ABC host, obviously. But the problem there was trying to find someone. So James Eddy that you heard there is a local science school teacher, and I grabbed him because he's got a good background in science. He does a bit of acting with the local theatrical society, so I thought that'd be a good mix there. So basically the podcast is created around all those bits of research I do, and then James comes along and goes through and kind of acts as the man on the street, if you like, but a bit of good knowledge in the background. What fascinates the both of us is we sit down, we've got some topics to talk about, and we start delving into a whole range of things that we didn't actually plan on doing. So exactly there is the example that you played, a bit of psychology around phones and around trying to get us to stay using our phones and using our apps. None of that, of course, was planned. We'd planned on talking about lack of sleep through technology, and you just don't know where things go sometimes.
I love that. And so many people can relate, like you say. I reckon most people would have their phones charging beside their bed. But frankly, we're being told they need to be charged in another room now, aren't they? They're saying having it in the same room as us is not great for our health.
Well, that's right. And that whole segment there was about the lack of sleep we're getting and how much sleep we're missing out on. And part of the advice that I gave was basically, it sounds terrible, I know, get the phone out of the bedroom, put it somewhere else, put it in another room, because we just can't help ourselves, Anna. We're sitting there in bed and you put it down before you go to sleep and you're just checking those last couple of things and you do end up doom scrolling. And then, of course, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do is reach across because you want to know what urgent things have happened between, 11 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning, because they're all the important things going on and you can't be missing out on anything. So it's really bad for our sleep and really bad for our sleep patterns to have that beside our bed. If it's not beside our bed, it's a bit more effort to get out of bed and go and look at it. So we probably don't tend to do that.
Especially on these cold mornings, I tell you now, that would be one on the lowest part of the list to get out of bed to grab the phone,
right.
I reckon, if it was far away. Matt Dickerson with us, and his podcast is Tech Talk. He's based in Dubbo, and we're featuring his podcast today. Of course, the tech reporting isn't all just bad news, gloom and doom, and that we're too reliant on our phones. Of course, there is fun and there's also games.
There's some great news, Matt. Atari is on the comeback. Is that right?
That is right. And I was right beside you, James. If we were ever invaded by a bunch of asteroids, I reckon I could explode them all with my little triangle that I could move
All
around the
those
screen.
Wasted hours that Mum and Dad said, they weren't wasted one little bit.
Absolutely not. Once the invasion happens, we've just got to wait for that to happen. But Atari is a big name in gaming consoles, or it was a big name. 25 years since they've released a gaming console.
Yeah, 25 years.
And I think it's fair to say gaming consoles.
I am old.
You're obviously playing when you're 2 or 3, James. But obviously with Atari, it's a name well known. But gaming consoles have changed now, and it's obviously the whole market is really at the forefront. We've got PlayStation 5, Microsoft Xbox Series X. They're the big two. And it's all about the games that have been built for those particular platforms. And so Atari came along and said, we're going to release a new gaming console, but they're so far behind now with the games, because it's no good if you've got a great console. You can have the best console in the world. If there's no games to play on it, if there's not the equivalent of the Space Invaders or asteroids.
Yeah, if you're going to send out Space Invaders again, yeah, we've done that.
It's such a blast from the past. But it's interesting, though, the tech companies are playing on our nostalgia. They are loving that, the kids from the 80s and 90s are cashed up and ready to buy.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Anna. The kids from the 80s and 90s didn't have money back in the 80s or 90s. I used to struggle to get 20 cents off Mum and Dad to go and play Space Invaders or whatever it might have been at the time. But now they've got a bit older, they've been working in some jobs, they might have a few dollars, and so they often will buy some of those old games for nostalgia. And even the kids, I know kids have bought me presents that have been based entirely on nostalgia from things that I've talked about from when I was growing up. Again, when there's a little bit more cash around, they do play on that nostalgia. And it's, I think, one of those parts of psychology as well, where you do romanticise about those ideas. Everything was much nicer back then, much grander, much better memories. It might have been really tough at the time, but we forget about all that. So we do love those nostalgia purchases.
What do you know about your podcast listeners, Matt, now that you've established? Are you getting streams from all around the world?
It's really mainly Australia at the moment. I've actually seen a few hitting on the list of, say, Indonesia. Haven't really broken into the American market yet, but you've really got to focus on where you want to go. If you do want to go into the American market, you've got to start spending some money on advertising and targeting. And over there are about 2 million podcasts out there at the moment, Anna, so it's a pretty crowded space. Obviously, they're not all technology, but you've got to try and get into that. So we're really focused on Australia at the moment. We're going quite well. We're hovering around number 12 in technology podcasts in Australia. It sometimes drops down to number 15 or so, but I've been pretty happy with that. And then you start to break it down even further to get the breakup of male, female, ages, that type of thing. So at the moment, we know that it's about 60% male. We find that the listening group is around 35 to 55, and that probably makes sense. The sort of things we're talking about are things that are happening now and happening into the future. Sometimes we go back with that nostalgia, as you heard then with that last one, but it's probably not really focused on the absolute latest game breakdown that a millennial might want, for example. So we kind of try and look at where technology is headed and look at the big picture. We talk a bit about renewables, we talk about electric vehicles. So it's really about what are the things people are going to be doing in 5 years' time, including those slippery toilets.
Yes, well, we're going to love that. But I love that there are those bigger conversations, putting things into perspective for us.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Matt, it's been great to chat. And I'm glad that it's homemade in Dubbo. Love that. And we'll catch up again, no doubt. Great to catch you. See ya.
Right. Thanks, Anna.
Tech Talk. See ya. Tech Talk, if I can get my teeth in, Tech Talk with Matt Dickerson. And you can find it on all the popular podcasting apps. And if you